There has never been a more important time to move in a vegan direction. Whether you're ready to start, restart, or re-energize your vegan or plant-based practice, this podcast is for you. I'm Michelle Olander, life coach, vegan, ADHD matriarch, travel lover, and smoothie loather. And I know that it's the details that get in the way of your vegan journey. But I like to believe that the obstacle is always the way. So every week we meet here where I translate the tools of life coaching and Stoic philosophy. I bring you actionable tips, some laughs, interesting guests, and vegan ideas for everyone at any age. All to help you veg your best. Episode 242, Vegan Transformation, with Angela Crawford, PhD. Happy Earth Day, my veg your besties. Happy Earth Day. If you're listening to this when this episode comes out, April 22nd, 2025, that's Earth Day. And Earth Day is kind of dear to my heart even before I became a vegan. I remember when it was launched because I've been around a while and because I had some really cool librarians in Glastonbury, Connecticut, where I grew up, who drew a lot of attention to it down in the exceptionally beautiful children's section of Wells Turner's library. And really, really great librarians. I remember it almost like yesterday. And that was in 1970, and I was just a little nerd back then. I loved the library. I loved the librarians in the children's department. And much later, on Earth Day 1989, the husband and I got officially married out on Block Island, Rhode Island, on a gorgeous, gorgeous daffodil-filled lawn near the Justice of the Peace's office. So it was a very informal marriage, and it worked. So we're happy about that, well, at least so far. So I want to thank you all for showing up to celebrate Earth Day and my anniversary, and also today, the publication date of a new book, The Vegan Transformation, by this week's guest, Angela Crawford, PhD. The vegan transformation isn't just about food, says Angela Crawford. It's about aligning with your deepest values and discovering a more meaningful, connected life. Our guest this week, Angela Crawford, is a psychologist, a transformational coach, and the author of this powerful new book, The Vegan Transformation, A Journey to Heal Yourself and the World. It's a big title, right? In it, Angela shares the results of original research she has done with vegans from around the world and some surprising and beautiful patterns she found in their stories. Now, you'll hear that Angela did not set out to write a book about spirituality or purpose or healing, but as you're going to hear, that's exactly what came out. Quiet introvert, we bonded over that concept. Both of us, I think, at least we identify as introverts. From quiet introvert to confident author and educator, Angela's journey mirrors in many ways the very transformation she's been studying: a deep alignment of values, a blossoming of purpose, and a spiritual shift that continues to ripple. If you've ever felt like you're called to do a little bit more, to be a little more, to try a little more, or just simply to live a little more authentically, especially in midlife and beyond, this episode is for you, I think. So I'll catch you on the other side. Dr. Angela Crawford, author of the newly published April 22nd Earth Day publication date, The Vegan Transformation. Welcome to Veg Your Best.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really honored to be here.
It's a delight to have you on, and I'm going to just start right off. What is the vegan transformation?
Well, it's a discovery that many of us find on the vegan path that living this lifestyle is actually deeply transformative on an inner psychological and spiritual level. And, many of us, before we become vegan or decide to go down that path, we might think, oh, how do you do this vegan thing? It's, it seems like it'd be so restrictive, or what do you eat? I mean, I used to wonder those questions myself. I grew up in the Midwest of the United States, where I thought, meat and dairy were just requirements for our health and well-being, or so I thought. And then as the path led me to become vegan, I actually discovered that my life opened up in ways that I hadn't anticipated. And I became more authentically myself. I found my voice after being a pretty quiet and private introvert most of my life. And it also helped me to feel more on purpose, more meaning, and more spiritually connected. And as I experienced all these changes as a psychologist, I became curious, how do other vegans experience this? And it seemed that when I was online communicating in vegan communities and networks, that I'd hear other people sharing transformations they experienced, some of them physical, like their health, and others more emotional, spiritual, a little harder to define in some ways, but even more meaningful. People that had found their purpose. I mean, it's amazing the number of people that have found either work or created a business or do volunteer work around this whole vegan message, or helping animals, or helping with human health or the environment. And so I wanted to study that. And that's what led to this book, which is, titled The Vegan Transformation. And it's really about this inner journey of transformation that seemed common across the people I was surveying and interviewing, for my book research. And so the book shares what are those transformations that were common for many vegans that I spoke to, and how do we discover those for ourselves? So that's what the book is about. And that's what the vegan transformation is. This inner shift in mindset and in inner well-being that can accompany this journey.
And you are uniquely qualified because you are a psychologist. You are a clinical psychologist. So I'm interested in, I count myself as somebody who seems to be reflected in, you didn't interview me, but I see myself in the work and the people you spoke with my entire life. If you had told me 10 years ago that I would be a vegan podcaster and coach, impossible. Completely impossible. But you are uniquely qualified as a behavioral scientist to ask the kind of questions that get at some of these shifts and changes, things that some of us have just kind of experienced without the right words, maybe, or without words. What did you do? How did you interview the people that you did?
Yeah, well, I was, still a relatively new vegan myself. I became vegetarian, over 18 years ago, and vegan 6 years ago. And it was really just a couple of years into my vegan journey that I decided to do this research. So I didn't have a huge network, but I was building it. And I reached out via social media and just different vegan groups I was part of to ask people first to do a survey. And I had about 350 people complete the survey. And the survey asked questions about how long they'd been vegan, what led them to become vegan, and then what were some of the emotional and social and spiritual changes they experienced as a result of that, asking both the positives they experienced and then some of the challenges, and also how did they overcome the challenges. I felt like there were already some books that get at the challenges of being vegan and how to address that, like Dr. Melanie Joy's work with Beyond Beliefs. Her book, gets at some of that about how to communicate. I felt there wasn't as much out there about how people's lives are transformed on a more psychological and spiritual level. So I really asked a lot of questions about the positive changes they experienced. And some questions were more like checkbox questions to, like a list of things that kind of fit with the positive psychology literature, things like spiritual deepening and fulfillment and peace and purpose and meaning. There were like 10 or 15 different items, and then an open-ended question where they could elaborate in their own words. And then I followed up with about 75 people to do in-depth interviews, just selected some who, seemed open to that conversation. They had said they were open to having a conversation and willing to share their journey. And so I spoke with them and went more in depth with some of those same questions and learning what led them to become vegan and how had their life been affected. And the book shares, the core principles that came through those interviews and surveys, as well as examples and stories and quotes that illustrate it.
Can you give me a sense of what age range or demographics your study encompassed? Were they all Americans or all North Americans or English speakers?
No, the age range varied a lot from probably 20s to 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Where they were located varied. There were people in Australia and the UK and India, and I think one from Japan. Probably
Mm-hmm.
the majority were from the US, but there were people from other areas as well.
Did you see something there in terms of different locations, in terms of the kinds of challenges and transformations people were experiencing?
It's interesting. I probably didn't have a large enough sample to have like a good sense of how things would really vary from location to location. But I think what struck me more was the commonalities, that it was like we were speaking this common language. And I found that, not just in the interviews, but just anytime I've been in a vegan networking group where there's people from around the globe, there's just this common sense of like we speak the same language and have this common passion. And so while there were probably are differences, I don't think I could speak to those from my study, but what I saw more than anything was what we shared in our values and our passion and commitment, and how many people were just willing to show up even at odd times, with different time zones, to be part of this research.
That's something I see reflected in my life all the time. I remember in the beginning, I was nervous to ask some kind of more, I don't know, would you say high profile vegans to be on the podcast or to give me some feedback about something. And only once have I been at all put off by anybody. Only once in all the other people. And I think that was actually their assistant. I don't think it was actually them. So
Yes.
it is really a very, I think we're all a little bit on the same mission to lower barriers to entry, to welcome people, and to have a big display of people doing it all different ways.
Yes, I've found that too. Just people, regardless, even the more well-known vegan leaders being so open to conversation, and that, like you say, we're all wanting to serve some higher purpose here.
So with the vegan transformation, my audience is typically skews older, and I'm wondering if there is something about people making this big shift in their second half or third of life that you maybe have seen or can speak to.
Yeah, I would guess, although I don't know for sure, that a lot of the people, it seemed like a lot of people I spoke to were in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and some younger, some older, but it seemed like there were a number that did find this in their midlife. And that was certainly true for me. Um, there's just something shifted where, whether it be for, health that opened the door or ethics that opened the door. And it is a time where we're ripe for this. For me personally, having always been, as I mentioned, sort of an introvert, and then not necessarily wanting to make waves in family dynamics. I think in my midlife, I'd reached a point where I cared less, what other people thought, and more about what was my authentic self calling me towards. And I see that in other women and people in this stage of life, that we feel, whether called for our health or called to honor our truth more, that this can be a really great time in life to take this journey. And, certainly it reaps benefits for our own well-being, but then also many of us just realize we want to create a better world. We see what's happening with climate change, and we start to realize the vast suffering of animals if we open our eyes to learn that. And so it can be a great time for that journey. And also a spiritual deepening can be a big part of that, of realizing how everything is interconnected. That came through with a lot of the people I interviewed, and that wasn't something I was expecting. I was amazed by how many people just open-ended responses would say things like, I now realize how I'm interconnected with nature and with all sentient beings in a way I never realized before. And so that was a kind of surprising finding that was very fulfilling for people.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that, the spiritual connection. I think what spiritual means is a very personal thing. I don't know if we have a universally accepted definition of that term. So what do you mean what in terms of what you saw?
Yeah, and I get into that in one of the chapters, so just as a foundation to talk about that a little bit, there were 7 core transformational themes that came through. And that was the 7th one that I listed. And, so each one has a chapter, each theme has a chapter, and the spiritual deepening, discovering our interconnectedness with life kind of chapter. Basically, as I touch on it in that chapter, spirituality, as you say, doesn't have a single definition. It can mean different things to different people. And I had more than one staunch atheist, that was part of the research. I think there were a few that identified that way. But even I would say that their description of their journey had themes that you could call spiritual, and that would be maybe not in the religious sense of spiritual, but this sense of I'm connected to something larger, whether it be nature or the universe or an inner wisdom. So yeah, spirituality can mean different things. I had a range of people, some of who had more traditional religious backgrounds and others that identified as spiritual but not religious, and then others that said, I'm not spiritual at all. One who said, compassion is my religion, so there's definitely this theme. And, when you look at spiritual teachings, many of them align with veganism. There are, if you look at spiritual teachings in their truest sense, they're about honoring kindness and compassion to others, and especially those that maybe don't have as much power, us standing for those that have less power. It has to do with being, good stewards of our planet, being kind to others. So I think there's a lot that connects veganism with spirituality, whatever version of spirituality someone, follows. And I think it can deepen people's spirituality. One thing that a lot of people said is when they were no longer eating animals, like the dense flesh of animals and the kind of violence that's inherent in eating animals, even though sometimes we don't realize that until we look into it. But people found that not eating animals made them feel lighter and sometimes have better intuition and better connection spiritually. And again, I think when we're not eating animals, we can realize more how we are all interconnected, that how we treat the planet and how we treat others comes back to affect us. Because if you're eating animals, you're kind of blocked to that. You can't look at how you're connected to them, because then you'd have to face what's happening and change your behavior. But once you stop eating them, it opens up doors that you hadn't expected, for many of us anyway.
I often say that when I stopped eating animals, it made me not just more compassionate, it made me much more humble about what else I don't see. And it put me in a sense of, I think I had always thought of myself as open-minded and thought of myself as someone who used critical thinking. But it really made me see I am likely, if not definitely, blind to many other things. Even though I wasn't blind intellectually to where my food came from, but I was blind in terms of my power to do anything about it, my power to opt out of it. And for me, I would say if you were asking me, that would be my sense of spirituality, is a real decentering of my confidence that I know better, that I'm much more trying to wake up a little bit.
I love that description. And I can resonate with that too. This sense of humility that there's things we've been blind to, or if not blind to, willfully blind, just that we haven't seen or haven't wanted to see. And so being more open to all the ways that our actions could have consequences. And I think this particular choice, choosing not to eat animals, has huge consequences because, eating is something we do every day, 3 times a day. And so I think for many people, choosing not to eat animals can be hugely transformative. And as you're mentioning, maybe open our eyes to other things, other ways that there's injustice that we hadn't seen before that we might be part of.
Yeah, I always call it a vegan practice because I feel like it's not a one and done. It is something, as you're saying, we're choosing it 3+ times a day, even with our other purchases, with how we clothe ourselves, how we take care of our homes and our families and our cars. I mean, we're trying to do our best with it all the time. And so it does stay a little bit top of mind, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And for those of us in situations where we have the financial resources to choose what we're eating, it's something we can do. And it's in a world where we often feel disempowered to make changes for things we care about. This is one thing that many of us do have the power to make the choice. And so it can feel very freeing and fulfilling to do it, And it doesn't mean being perfect because like you and like you describe, I'm each day discovering it and I'm not perfect. But you just try to explore and learn and do better.
Because it just resonates throughout all our choices, throughout all our systems, throughout all our relationships. So when you structured your book, obviously you had all this information that you had gleaned as a behavioral scientist from talking to people, from doing your probably motivational interviewing, that sort of thing. But is that what you used in terms of your personal interviews?
It wasn't a specific structure like that. It was a structured interview, but it was about looking at their reasons for becoming vegan, the challenges they had, and then the benefits they had, and then going deeper with any of those issues as they came up. So that was sort of the basic foundation.
I see. So if some of my listeners, like myself, are, we identify as pretty committed vegans and we feel like we've got personally that dialed in, but we have family members or friends or people who either they or we are frustrated with their progress. What did you learn about some of those barriers and challenges, and that we can be more supportive or helpful? How can we not get in the way of other people's movement?
Yeah, that's an important question because, so often when we become vegan, we just want to share what we've learned and we think that if we share it, they'll change. And then we quickly discover like most people don't want to hear it. And even if they do, they just aren't affected by it in the way that we think they'll be or think they should be. And sometimes it can lead to conflict and it's a journey. And many of us are more pushy early on and then have to kind of decide how to navigate when we realize that's not working. Well, for one, I do think the book itself is good for both veg curious who are open because it's written in a way that is not attacking, to the non-vegan. It really invites people to explore how veganism can be beneficial to them personally as well as to things they care about. And in terms of specific things that those already vegan can do, it does touch on thriving emotionally and socially as a vegan and communication as well, and some of the challenges we run into. So I guess a few things. It's just, meeting people where they are. We have ideas of how veganism has changed our lives, but it may not be that way for someone else. And so sometimes it's seeing what interests them or what their concerns are and being able to address and meet those concerns and needs rather than just dismiss them. Someone asked that protein question, and rather than getting annoyed, be like, I wondered that too at one point. Where does a vegan get their protein? Just probably we did, most of us, because we're raised in a culture where that's just so. Even though it's an annoying question to hear again and again, if you've heard it a million times, trying to actually realize, I guess for me, it's helped to remember where I was before, because I think once I became vegetarian and then vegan, I was impatient for a while. Like, why don't people get what I now see? But I've had to learn to dial it back. And that's what I teach others, is to step back, remember your own journey, and to share that. I wondered that too. This is what I discovered since. So iMessages about your own journey, being patient that it can be a path and not an overnight change for most people, bringing them information that resonates with what they actually have questions about or wonder about, and planting seeds and realizing that change happens in its own time, as much as we want it to happen faster. And, sometimes with family and friends, we're not going to be the person that can make that change, because sometimes our family and friends are less likely to listen to us than someone else. That depends. Some people I've known, some of the people I interviewed got their whole family to go vegan, good for them. But for many of us, it doesn't always happen that way. And so just realizing I can plant seeds, I can be a good role model, I can share what I need from them too. Seeking your friends and family to be a vegan ally can also be a good way for them to learn about veganism without pressuring them. And they can sometimes be more open. That's something Dr. Melanie Joy teaches about, is just letting people in our life know, hey, I've become vegan. This lifestyle really matters to me. I'd love you to be a support for me. And these are the ways you can do that. And as you're doing that, again, they can learn about veganism without it being pressure. And people are more likely to change if they can explore things and not feel like pressured, or that you're trying to force something down their throat that they're not ready for. I mean, I know as a coach, relate to this. Like, people change because they feel an inner call to change, not because someone tried to make them change. And so if we can invite them to find their own reasons for it, they're more likely to be open.
Yeah, I always think that you have to believe it's even possible. And that's something
Yes.
every single vegan can do, is just show that it's possible just by living their life and as well as they can. I know you and I both were speaking earlier that we both basically identify as introverts. And I think in my anecdotal world, I see that as being a barrier for a lot of people, especially women, socialized as women in the second half of life. They're like, oh my gosh, am I going to have to be that girl? Am I going to have to be that person in the restaurant or at the party, or asking what's in there, and just not feeling super comfortable with that? And the practice of it really, I know you talk about finding your voice. I for sure I resonate with that as well. I learned how to be a little bit more effective and a little bit more insistent, but knowing I'm being insistent for a reason. I'm not being insistent to be a problem for anybody.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great point. And for many of us as vegans, the research shows that social issues are probably the biggest deterrent for people either staying vegan or even kind of really going down that path, because we're such social creatures. And so this idea of not fitting in socially or being different, or how to navigate all those holidays and family gatherings that center around animal foods, those are found to be the biggest reason people either lapse away from veganism or maybe don't fully go there to begin with. So if we can learn how to find our voice and navigate those things, that's huge. And I mean, obviously, there's a lot of things in life where that would be good for us to learn to speak up in ways that build connections and bridges versus, shutting down communication. So I think it's a learning opportunity for all of us to step into. And some people, that are not introverts, they might be very vocal, but they might do it in a way that still alienates and doesn't connect. So I think it's a learning journey for all of us, whether we're more kind of quiet and shy, or we're more out there, how do we connect with people in a way that actually will open up listening and maybe curiosity and openness?
And those are muscles we can use in all sorts of aspects of our lives, not just in how we feed ourselves or how we comparison shop or research, read labels. You can use that in every single part of our lives.
Yes, exactly.
So tell me something about writing the book, because holy cow, what an achievement. Congratulations. This book is coming out on Earth Day, which is beautiful, the vegan transformation. Tell me something about, when you were doing the research, were you doing the research for the book, or were you doing the research separately and then realized you might have a book there?
I did the research for the book. Before I became a psychologist, when I was in undergraduate college, I was a journalism major first. And as a child, I'd always loved writing. I'd envisioned myself someday writing a book. But midway through college, I took some psychology classes and I felt called that this was my path. And I thought I would write. And I did do some, writing academically early on. And then I went into private practice and, was so busy seeing clients that writing went on the back burner for a long time. And when I became vegan, I knew like this is the time. This is the book I've been waiting to write. And I knew it'd be interviews with people because part of my background earlier in psychology and then of course in journalism was interviewing people and just how people's journeys and stories illustrate different themes that matter to us, illustrate certain themes that are relevant for the larger picture for the reader. So yes, I started it doing the interviews and surveys in 2021, and probably spent about a year doing that while I was working full time, and I knew it would become a book, but it just wasn't sure how that would all unfold. But gradually, just things unfolded. I started to see what the core themes were, and then I reached out to Lantern Publishing and Media, who after I did a proposal with them, they agreed to publish it, and which was super exciting because I wasn't sure if I'd go more the self-publishing route or how it would work. I realize it's really hard these days to get a publisher. Even some people I know that have had several books, are having some trouble with that these days. So I was thrilled to have them agree to publish it, and that kind of gave me the impetus to basically finish a big bulk of the writing in a 6-month period. I'd done some writing before then, but I had the 6 months before it was due to the publisher to just really dive in. And so I just, for a 6-month period, was working on it full time and got it to the publisher. And, it was not easy, but I just took it step by step and I sought support along the way. I had different book mentors that helped me navigate certain parts of the journey and just kept taking the next step, the next step, the next step. It felt very overwhelming at times. And now, like, to actually hold it in front of me, it's just like, it's an amazing thing.
It really is. I really congratulate you. And isn't it interesting that it's the same skill set you need for everything? You just have to keep at it step by step. it's such boring advice.
Yes. And I think, as you're saying earlier, like, have people that represent what it is you're trying to move towards, like you said, for veganism, finding other authors and finding some mentors that could help me see what was possible and help me map out my journey so I even knew how to proceed, and then to just and discover what worked for me, because sometimes what someone else said didn't work for me, and keep finding my path forward until wow, it was there. And it was, yeah, I'm still kind of amazed.
I wondered if having succeeded in moving in a vegan direction was partially the skill set that helped you succeed in writing the book.
That's an intriguing idea. And I would say so. I say it certainly played a role. Obviously, there's a lot of things in life, like trainings I've gone through, that might also have represented that skill set. But becoming vegan, I had to look at where was I blocked in I knew I wanted to become vegan, but what was getting in the way and what were the actual steps I would take to overcome those blocks? And probably very similar with the book, finding out what was getting in the way of me making progress and how was I going to set up a plan that would make it doable. And so you're right, there was definitely an overlap there.
Are you comfortable saying some of the things that were a block for you in moving in a vegan direction? What were some of
Sure,
the big rocks, obstacles in the path?
definitely. Because I think they're so, I mean, we may each have different ones, but it's so important to acknowledge them. Um, when I became vegetarian, I mean, that was a big journey in and of itself. Um, in 2007, that was because like I mentioned, had always thought meat and dairy were necessary, as most of us are raised to believe. So becoming vegetarian was huge in and of itself. And it was because I learned about first how workers were treated and then the animals. And then over time, I learned the other stuff like the health aspects of what we eat and just all of, the animals were the thing that kept me not eating meat, but the other things helped support the journey too, like knowing that it was the best thing I could do for my health because I have a family history of heart disease. But then becoming vegan, I knew for a while that it was probably the right next step. But I think for one, I hadn't yet emotionally connected with what happened to the dairy cows and the egg laying hens in the way I had with meat. Somehow with meat, I just got this visceral connection of that it was animal flesh and no longer was it on the menu for me. And just that was a cut and dried thing. But I think because dairy and eggs were harder for me to make that emotional connection to how it caused harm, even though I knew it intellectually, I think that was one block that I needed to really connect emotionally with what happened to them, to the dairy cows and hens and cows for leather and all the other stuff. I needed to find that emotional connection. And I'll mention in a minute how I did that. But some of the other blocks were more practical, like how I'd handle social situations where, like, for example, my in-laws, it seemed like every spring there were like 4 or 5 birthdays where there was birthday cake and, you're expected to eat it. And it's not, of course, not vegan. And, just having to be that person that's like, oh, I'm not going to eat the birthday cake. It was just sort of, and I was still processing things myself. So, and then, what to eat for certain meals where I still was having dairy and eggs. Because even though I'd cut that back quite a bit, since being vegetarian, I still had it in some social situations. So what was I gonna substitute? How was I gonna fill that in? So the practical stuff wasn't so hard to learn. You can do your research. I read the 30-Day Vegan Challenge by Colleen Patrick Gaudreau, and that really helped me with a lot of the practical stuff and also helped me just set a goal and a time frame that I gave myself like a month to figure out what I needed to know to actually commit to this. And so I learned everything I needed to learn about, your personal products and that so that they were vegan and how, what I could eat for breakfast and social stuff a little harder, but I worked on planning what I wanted to say to people ahead of time. Of course it became easier, but at first, I would take my sister-in-law aside and just explain, hey, I became vegan. I'm not just vegetarian now. I'm also not eating this, this, and this. And I just wanted to let you know before this next gathering why I'm not going to eat the birthday cake, but I'm going to bring something for myself, but I just wanted you to understand. So, just little things like that I worked out. Um, the connecting with the animals that just made it all, I don't know, not even hard anymore, or not as hard, was after watching several videos and reading several books. I finally watched Earthlings, which, I didn't really want to watch, but I did. And once I watched that, and I'm not even sure I made it all the way through, I was just, so distressed. I was just like, no way could I eat anything from an animal again if I can help it. It just helped everything actually be easier because it gave me that strong inner why. When you have that strong enough why, it does make it easier to overcome the challenges with the how, so that happened too in the whole process.
Those documentaries, what are there about maybe a dozen of them that most people cite one or two of them as being tremendously influential in that decision. Earthlings, for sure, not as often because so many people are like, I don't think I can go there. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was influenced by all of them.
Mm,
So many of them were so important on the journey, but that one was just the one where I could no longer lie to myself anymore that somehow any of this wasn't harmful or it wasn't that bad or whatever.
yeah. Yeah. So tell me about how the book is structured and for our listeners today, what they're going to find in the book. And you were kind enough, for Sandra Nemoto, who's been on the podcast before. She was telling me about you, and she was kind enough to send me a PDF or a scan of the book. And so I've been going through it. There's a lot in there. Why don't you give us a sense of what you want to make sure that the listeners know is in there for them?
Awesome. I wrote it to, I think, a couple different audiences. One is the veg curious person who is also into mind, body, spirit growth. And because it really brings together the mind, body, spirit connection with veganism. And it's also for someone who's already vegan, but just wants to continue growing and thriving on their journey. So, the intro gets into the why, the basic why of being vegan that, many of us that are vegan already know, but just lays out the foundation of, the ethics and the health and spiritual and environmental impacts of our food choices. So it kind of lays the foundation. But then the subsequent chapters get into the topics that came through my research. So it has to do with values alignment and how much that changes our life when we actually are living aligned with our deepest values. Has to do with compassion, awakening our compassion and expanding our circle of compassion, purpose and meaning, and then authentic fulfillment, connecting with others in meaningful ways, health empowerment, and then that spiritual deepening that we talked about earlier. So each chapter is one of these themes that came through the research, and it covers both why that theme matters. Why does it matter that we align with our values? What's the benefits for us? What does the science show? And then what did my own participants share about it? How did it influence them? And then each chapter also has a story that illustrates that theme, as well as reflection questions at the end that the reader can engage in. If you want to know, you're not sure what your own values are, or you want to deepen to understanding them, there's questions that help you explore that and how are you living aligned with them. And so each chapter has that, the theme, and then some information that helps understand it, some things that illustrate it, and then questions that help you as the reader engage with that theme in your own life. And then there's a couple chapters at the end that are more about the process of behavior change, and then also the social emotional aspects of thriving as a vegan and dealing with some of the challenges that we might face, socially or emotionally as we go down that path.
I was thinking when you were talking about the questions that are in the chapters, the questions for people to engage with the material. When I was reading those, I was thinking these are great for people who are trying to do this with someone else, maybe a buddy, maybe someone across the country, maybe somebody inside the family, or a lot of people know that my daughter went through a vegan period of time, and that's what kind of started me beginning. That's something, if you have a vegan in your family or lifestyle and you kind of don't get it, I thought this book is a beautiful thing. If you love a vegan and you just don't know how to be supportive particularly, or you don't really understand what they're thinking, it can be a way of, because sometimes new vegans, I have seen, can play it very close to the bed. They don't want to be interrogated about it because it's a lot for them. They're trying to make their choices and they don't want to have to explain themselves and then maybe say something wrong or say something in error or contradict themselves in some way. So I have seen especially a lot of young vegans really kind of shut down. I think if you are somebody who is a mother, a grandmother, a mother-in-law of a vegan or a vegetarian, this book would be very helpful, very useful for you.
Well, that's awesome. I like that idea. Yeah, I could definitely see that. And as you were mentioning too, I could see like a book club or book study, discussion on some of those too, just seeing how having someone to share with your own responses and have someone to discuss that with that can relate.
So, Dr. Angela Crawford, how do we get to know more about you? I understand we can buy the book as of April 22nd, Earth Day 2025. We can buy it all the places you get books. How do we find out more about you and working with you, maybe as a vegan coach or learning from you? You have a blog, you have a YouTube channel, which we were both commiserating that it's hard to keep up.
Yes, it is. Well, the best way to connect with me is my website, angelacrawfordphd.com. On my website, I have my social media links on the contact page. I have, as you mentioned, a link to the YouTube channel and other media that I've been on. I have a services section where I talk about, I do speaking, I write a blog, as you mentioned, and I do some coaching, especially around how to thrive emotionally and socially as a vegan. And also, I teach food for life classes, which is a physicians committee for responsible medicine in my local community, and some online too. Just anything that can help people, on their journey to like how this lifestyle can be sustainable and thriving.
So, what's one thing you want to leave everybody with this week in this week's episode of Veg Your Best? The vegan transformation. What is something we could all do, maybe whether we're vegan or not, do you think? Am I putting you on the spot too much?
Let me take a moment here.
Yeah, take your time.
Yeah. If you're not yet vegan, but you're curious, take that first step. Explore, and don't be hard on yourself if it's doesn't all happen overnight. Take a step forward to eat some veg meals, read some great stuff that inspires you, take that first step. If you're already vegan, include self-care and self-compassion as part of your vegan journey. So many of us are compassionate for others, and that's important. But I do believe we need to hold this compassion that includes ourselves and includes others. If either one is neglected, we're out of balance. So I suppose this would be true both to vegans and pre-vegans, just find this way to hold this balance of caring for yourself and your own needs and seeing your own humanness, your own, that you are an animal too, and then keep expanding your compassion outward to include more and more beyond you and finding that how you can hold those together.
Yeah, that's great advice. We live in a complicated world. Everybody's fully committed. Everybody's got a full plate right now, and we're not championing this lifestyle to make you more tired, more exhausted. We're not.
Exactly. I mean, it can uplift you and energize you. It's just finding your way in that works for you, and knowing that we each can have our own path that might be a little different for different people. But having supports like, this podcast can be so important, to show us a way forward that's doable.
Just try to be each other's friends and cheer each other on. And if the only thing standing in your way is birthday cake, I always say don't throw out the concept, the rest of it, because birthday cake is in the way. If you still eat the birthday cake, there's no vegan police. They're going to kick down your door. You are, yes, yes, I would prefer not to ever have any animal products again. That is how I like to live now, but it's not how it always was for me.
Exactly. No, exactly. Like not feeling that purity, needing to be pure or perfect needs to get in the way of your journey. And, any steps forward are huge, both for you and for the impact you have beyond.
Dr. Angela Crawford, thank you so much for being a guest this week on Veg Your Best. I'm going to have all the links to your book, The Vegan Transformation, and to your website, which is
It's Angela Crawford, PhD.
angelacrawfordphd.com.
Yeah.
That's awesome. We're going to put that all together in the show notes, and I hope everybody will think about maybe buying a supportive copy of The Vegan Transformation for someone in their lives, or for themselves. That would be great.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me. This is really great to talk to you.
So what did you think? What did you think about Angela Crawford? I so enjoyed, sometimes I talk to my guests and I enjoy them, or I learn from them, or I'm amazed by them. I felt at the end of my conversation with Angela that she was somebody I've known for years and years. She just has such a calm, thoughtful presence. That is just another marvelous addition to this vegan movement that we're all on. And to anyone yearning for a more authentic, purpose-driven life, I think you're going to love this book. And I want to give a shout out to previous guest, Sandra Nemoto, who works just tirelessly so hard for people in this vegan movement. She calls herself the vegan hype woman, and book whisperer, and she's just all about trying to help people more effectively gain audiences and meet people where they are and just communicate a little more effectively. So it was Sandra who was kind enough to connect me with Angela and get me an advance copy of Angela's book. And I think you're going to see the vegan transformation is more than just, it's more than a plant-based how-to. It's really a heartfelt, research-backed invitation to reconnect with your values and your voice, even your vision for a better world. And a lot of that starts with just your next bite, your next purchase. So whether you're just taking your first steps towards plant-based living, or you've been doing this for years and you just want to feel a little more grounded, connected, and inspired by the way others have approached it, I highly recommend you pick up a copy. And it's available, The Vegan Transformation, wherever you buy books. And you can find links along with Angela's website and social media in the show notes. You're going to see all of that there. And Angela's message, honestly, could it be more perfect for Earth Day? A reminder that choosing compassion, even in small, everyday ways, can be deeply radical, deeply transgressive even, deeply healing, and deeply you. Because we all do this our own way. So, if this conversation inspired you at all, please share it with a friend. Leave a review. Please tag me or Angela on Instagram. Let us know what resonated with you. And honestly, yes, it's Earth Day, but every day is Earth Day, isn't it? And all you really have to do to celebrate every day is veg your best. Veg Your Best podcast production, music, and editing by Charlie Weinshank. Thanks, Charlie. Before you go, it would mean so much to me and the Veg Your Best team if you would hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, or share with someone you think might be interested. Something about algorithms, it helps bump us up a little in the rankings, and that's the best way to help others find the podcast and for us to find our audience. So, until next week, make it easy and veg your best.